I wanted to share with you briefly how I came to cross paths with somebody in the state of Texas by the name of Brett Morris, who is one of the most prolific podcasters in the United States. That's not an embellishment, by the way. Brett hosts a podcast that is recovery focused, that draws over 1,000 people per week. And I'll let Brett verify the numbers, but he's even had podcasts that he's hosted with a couple of other people in other states that have drawn between 10 and 20,000 people. So this is a guy who's doing a whole lot of things right, and he has an incredible story to share. And that leads me to how I got to meet him. You guys, Brandon, can everybody see you and your head of hair that I wish I had? Okay.
Yeah, well, they can see.
Yeah. So
yeah,
Brandon has been with us nearly from day one. We met Brandon at the 242 Community Church, and he was our AV guy on loan from the good folks at the 242 Community Church. Left Michigan to move to Nashville, Tennessee. And through the wonders of technology, he's still able to support us via Zoom despite being in Nashville. And I give Brandon all the credit, because since he started doing this, we don't have Zoom snafus. Knock on wood with that one. But we don't have problems with Zoom since Brandon took over. But Brandon, despite being our Zoom coordinator, is always looking out for Washtenaw Fan and for people in recovery. And case in point is, he reached out to me, I don't know, what was it, 3 months ago? It was in the winter.
3 months ago.
It was 3 months ago. And he said, look, I crossed paths with this guy. And at the time, I didn't know it was Brett's dad. I found out about Brett's dad, who's puffing away on that stogie up there, which is awesome. And Brandon at that time said, I crossed paths with a guy that I think you might want to bring on board as a guest speaker at one of your forums. And I said, all right, what's his story? What's his name? And I heard about it. And I thought, send me an email with his information. Brandon did that. Brandon, I can't thank you enough for that, because the reason this is happening is primarily due to you and the way you care about our community, even though you are in your community in Nashville. And but as everybody who is Zooming in knows, this is not specific to a community. We all share the same community of recovery. And I'm thankful for you for opening the door with Brett. So I talked with Brett. I got to know Brett over a series of phone calls. And he shared his story with me. And somehow the topic of I asked about his mom and dad. And he talked about his mom, he talked about his dad, and he mentioned that his dad is a retired member of law enforcement. And it struck me that, I get a lot of requests from families and parents who, they struggle with their child's addiction, and being joined at the hip with them on that recovery journey. And I thought, my goodness, we got a guy here with an amazing story whose father is a member of law enforcement. And I asked Brett, if you don't mind me asking, what did your dad do in law enforcement? And he told me he was a retired sergeant and a retired Texas State Trooper, and he was a sergeant. That really piqued my interest, because I wanted to get Sergeant Morris's take on his son's addiction and how that affected him as a dad, how it affected him as a retired Texas State Trooper. And I asked Brett if he would ask his father to join us on our Zoom meeting today, his father, who is on your screen, um, said yes. And I'm so grateful that he did, because we're all going to learn a lot from these two gentlemen, and to show you where they are in terms of helping people battle the disease of addiction. Tragedy struck the Morris family. Brett's grandpa passed away not long ago, last week. And I'll be honest with you, I didn't know if Brett was going to be here with us today. And but he is. And I'm eternally grateful for that. I told him he didn't have to do it, that if needed, we would share our stories and make do with what we've got. But Brett is here, and so is his father. And I'm just so thankful to you both. And before I cut over to Brett and we let Brett share his story, Sergeant Morris.
Yes, sir.
Why don't you let everybody see that t-shirt you got on? I am aging like a fine cigar. What does that say? A little leathery, full-bodied, and a little leathery. That's awesome. And you know, when I saw your picture, when Brent sent me your bio and your picture, I thought it reminded me of Ernest Hemingway. And you're rocking it out there with that beard and that cigar.
Thank you.
And why don't you, before we cut over to your son, right before this meeting started, and I talked with you about how you came up, why don't you tell us specifically what you did in the world of law enforcement with the Texas State Troopers, because that takes it to a whole another level.
Well, the last 22 years of my career before I retired the first time, I was undercover narcotics for the Texas State Police. So my job was to track traffickers and drug transporters and pushers and arrest them and prosecute them. And so everything about me is anti-drug.
Okay, so Sergeant Morris, do me a favor and lift your screen up a little bit so we can see that Hemingway-esque mug. There you go, right there.
All right.
Awesome. That's great. So then there's Brett now in his recording studio, which is great. So Mr. Morris, I know you've got another meeting coming up here in about 30 minutes. So before we get to Brett, I'm going to kind of switch it up, because I want to give you an opportunity to just share your perspective on this, not only as a dad, but as a member of a law enforcement and as an undercover narcotics member of law enforcement. So take us back to Brett's story, and when did you first found out, and how did, just in general, how did it affect the Morris family, your employment as a member of law enforcement, and where are you today with your son? And it started off there, Sergeant Morris.
So Brett started, to my knowledge, and I didn't know quite as early. I knew when maybe not the first time. I knew when he was probably 12, maybe. We were at my sister's house for Thanksgiving, and there was most of my family does not drink, but my sisters do, and their husbands. And so wine was served with the meal, and some of the adults drank their wine and some didn't. And after we left the table and went to watch the Cowboy game or whatever we were doing, found out later that Brett had gone into the dining room and he was draining all the wine glasses. I think he was 12, and he was draining the wine glasses. So
he got started early.
Right.
Okay.
So my sister told me, that had happened, and I didn't want to overreact and make a big deal out of it because I didn't want him, if you act like you shouldn't do that and it's bad, then that's what they're going to do. So, my recollection, I asked him kind of what he thought of it and what he thought of the taste and whatever, and encouraged him not to be doing that because it was illegal and he was 12 years old and he needed to turn those numbers around and be 21 instead of 12 before he was legal to drink. But I've since found out that he continued to drink when he could, and somewhere not too long after that, maybe 14 or 15, I think he started to smoke weed a little bit with some coworkers, and he did a pretty good job of hiding it. There were times when I knew that he was, if he wasn't intoxicated, he was at least under the influence. But he was a pretty good kid, and he was always a very compliant kid. And so his mother, who was raised, his mother and her brother, I always tell them that there's no two kids in the world like they were, because their parents said be home at 9, they were home at 8:30. They said, don't do this, and they didn't. And so my wife could never comprehend that our kids would mislead us and do something that was against our wishes. And I was pretty much exactly the opposite. If my dad said be home at 11, I got home at 11:01. So I was in the driveway at 11, so and I pushed the envelope. If I didn't break the rules, I got all the way up and straddled the line. And so I was a totally different personality from my wife. And so I knew that most kids are at least something like me and nothing like her. And so I was considered to be hard on the kids because I didn't believe them. I didn't always trust them. Sometimes I said no just because. And so that was a little bit of strife in our household, just in the raising of the kids. But as Brett got older, I later found out that he started to experiment with lots of other controlled substances. And ultimately, I think his drug of choice was probably methamphetamine, which was very scary to me because there are very few people who get addicted to methamphetamine that stop using until they die. And so Brett moved out to go to college. I think he was 18. Well, first he went to China the year that he turned 17 in China. He was on a mission trip, and he and a buddy were there, quote unquote, unsupervised. They stayed with some friends of ours that were missionaries, but I have no idea what they did. Or, he's on the other side of the world, so they could be doing anything. So he came back home, and when he graduated from high school, he was a homeschooled. Both our kids were homeschooled. When they graduated, he went to college, and he moved out and moved into a house with a bunch of guys. And I knew they partied, and I suspected that they smoked weed, but I didn't know anything about the meth at that point, or the cocaine, or the heroin, or the LSD, or any of the other controlled substances that he's at least experimented or dabbled in. And so as the months went by, it became more apparent that he was probably addicted, or at least in a very committed relationship with multiple different kinds of narcotics. And his sister, who had moved out, she's a year younger than he is. She had moved out and was living with a friend, and then she was married, and so Brett and his sister were always very close, and so she kind of got the lowdown on things, and she would tell my wife and I what was going on, and so that was alarming to us. And we both, I mean, I don't know if this is a faith-based program or not, but I'm
Go ahead.
faith-based,
Yep,
so
go
I'm
ahead.
telling it from the faith-based side. We were disappointed because we knew that Brett had been raised in the church. We knew he had been raised in a Christian home. We knew that he'd been raised in a law enforcement officer's home. And for the vast majority of his life, I think I got into narcotics when he was 4 or 5. So he can barely remember me as a uniformed state trooper. He always knew me as a guy with long hair and a beard. So, excuse me, we were concerned on multiple levels. And I don't think I was, I mean, maybe I was embarrassed to a slight extent, that I'm a narcotics officer and my son is a narcotics user. But my concern was not my embarrassment. My concern was his
Your son.
life choices and the consequences that those could lead to, whether that meant incarceration or overdose death or injured or killed in a drug deal gone bad, which happens all the time. And so I was more concerned about that and his safety. And so I think his mom was, probably even more concerned, and she didn't have any inkling or knowledge of how bad it could be. And so I tried not to share a lot of that with her, what could happen and what I saw on a daily basis. I think she was much more, she beat herself up wondering what she did wrong for Brett to end up to be an addict. I mean, I'm not gonna say I never thought about it, but I raised him right. We raised him right, and he makes choices, and his choices have consequences. And so I've always been one that you make a choice, and then the choice makes you. And so I obviously wanted him to make different choices, but I didn't feel like I had done anything to encourage him. I was not, I mean, I was strict, but I was not abusive. I was not, I mean, he didn't have the upbringing that a lot of kids do where they see their parents, drinking to excess or using drugs or partying with people. And he didn't need to use drugs because, his dad was beating him. And when he got home, he would be beaten. And so he'd go away and use drugs to help cope with, whatever kind of problems like that. And so I didn't take a whole lot of ownership in that because I don't feel like I own a whole lot of that, frankly.
Right.
So as the months went on, it was obvious that he was using speed pretty regularly. He was losing weight, and his involvement with his mother and I was becoming less frequent, and it was almost always on the phone and almost very rarely in person. And so it was just, there were some telltale signs. And so on Super Bowl Sunday of 20, I don't know, 13, I think it might have been 14, but I think it was 2013, got a call from his sister, I believe, and or maybe it was from him, I can't remember. And he had been arrested for DUI. He was delivering pizzas. That was his job. And so evidently between deliveries, he and his coworkers would drink quite heavily. And he had been on a break and had quite a bit to drink and was texting his girlfriend that he could see double or triple and whatever. And then the next text was, I think I'm going to jail. So long story short, he's delivering that he's intoxicated, and he hit 5 parked cars and overcorrected from the last parked car into someone's front yard, through their yard, hit the fence, and his truck came to rest in their house, or at least against their house. And so he did go to jail. And so my wife, obviously, we were not pleased, and she was pretty much scared to death. I was plenty worried because that happened in Dallas, and I knew that he was going to the Dallas County Jail, which, having been there dozens, if not hundreds of times myself, it's a scary place, and I know I'm leaving every time. I can't imagine being locked into a cell. I've talked to lots of guys that tell you that county jail is much scarier than prison, just because of prison, it's kind of final, and just the mindset is different of people who are in prison as opposed to guys who are in jail. Plus, when you're in prison, you tend to be a little more sober after a while than you are when you get into jail, because people get in and out and they come in all kinds of physical states and mental states. But so we left him. I had to fight with my wife to leave him in jail for a couple of nights to let him just let him, reap what he sowed a little bit. And I told her on more than one occasion that if he was in our local jail instead of the Dallas jail, I'd leave him there until court, because it's a much smaller jail and not nearly as dangerous and stuff. So I think he was in there 4 days. And I had a friend that worked for the district attorney's office in Dallas that was checking on him on the computer. And so on the 4th day, he called me and said, hey, they are reducing Brett's bond to where I think they were reducing his bond to where $100. So if one of his friends came up with, excuse me, with $10, they could get him out of jail. And I told my wife, I said, it's time to go get him, because we didn't want one of his friends to, come up there with $10 and get him out of jail and take him back to his life and him go right back to the party life that he was living. So we went down that night, got him out of jail. And I can't remember. I think he asked where we were going, and I said home. And so we took him home. He didn't want to be at home again. He had lived on his own for 3 years, give or take. And so there were rules, and I understood that he was, 20 years old, but he was treated like he was 10 or 12. He didn't have a vehicle, so he couldn't go anywhere. I explained to him that he needed to find employment because I had already raised him and he was more than 18. And so if he was going to live in my house, he was going to have to pay room and board, because I didn't want him to think that he could live in our basement, quote unquote, forever, even though we don't have a basement. I didn't want to make it difficult on him, but I wanted him to realize that if he didn't want to live at home with his mom and dad, that he needed to get gainful employment and start making the right decisions and get himself to a place where he could live away from home again. So within the first week or two, he got a job, and it was about 7 miles from our house to his job. So he had a mountain bike, and so he rode his bike to and from work 7 miles. And when he first started that job, it was late February. And Texas is generally a warm place, but in February and March, it cannot be very warm. So there were days where he rode in the freezing cold to and from work. There were days when he rode to and from work in the rain. And my wife wanted to take him, and I was like, absolutely not. Make him ride his bike. If he's cold, if he's wet, then that helps him realize, if I don't want to be cold and wet, I got to act like an adult and not be a drug user. And one day on his way to work on the bike, I don't remember if he was on the sidewalk or something, but he hit a slick spot and he went down and he broke, I believe, his left thumb and maybe forefinger, but he broke something in his left wrist area. So I think she took him to work a couple of days, the first couple of days after that, and then it was back to riding the bicycle with a broken arm to and from work. So fast forward a little while, I have a friend who owns a business, and Brett was doing better, and he had to go to court mandated AA meetings. And for the first several months, I think he went just to get his paper checked so he could stay on probation and not get in trouble. Somewhere in the 3 to 5 month time, something clicked in his brain, and he understood that he was an alcoholic and he was a drug addict and he needed to be there. And so then the program actually started to work for him and his recovery began. So I had a friend who owned his own business, and he was looking to hire a couple of people. And I reached out and he said, I'm going to hire 2 guys in August. And he said, I've got enough work to keep them busy, but come December, when this job is over, I'm only going to keep one of them. He said, I'll hire him as a favor to you, but I won't keep him if he's not a good worker. And I said, I don't have any problem with that. I said, he's got a work ethic and he'll work for you. And he'll, at the end of the 4 months, you'll be hiring him. I know that. Well, he did. And long before 4 months was over, his boss was complimenting him on his work ethic and was buying tools for him and was kind of a secondary dad for him at the work site. So he worked there, I can't remember, he'll know, 4 or 5 years. And when he moved to that job, it was about 20 miles, I think 15 to 20 miles one way to work. And so I bought a 250cc scooter for Brett and said, here's a scooter, you can ride it to and from work. Again, I don't care how cold it is. I don't care how hot it is. I don't care if it's raining. You wrecked your truck. This is what you can ride this or you can walk. It matters not to me. So when he started at work, all of his coworkers called him Scooter, and because he rode a scooter to work. And so he rode, 15 miles each way on the interstate, some of it on a 250cc scooter. But he never missed a day of work. He wasn't late. He worked hard. He worked late. He did whatever was asked of him. And somewhere in the first, 6 or 8 months after he had a change in his attitude and he was in recovery and he was committed to his recovery, he and his boss were talking one day and his boss asked him, he said, so how's your relationship with your dad? And he said, it's a lot better than it used to be. And his boss said, well, why do you think that is? And Brett said, because I'm making a lot better decisions than I was making earlier. And I'm basically, he said in so many words, because I'm becoming a man and I'm being responsible and I've got a job and I work every day and I do the right things and I go to my meetings at night and I'm not doing stupid stuff. And I think they had that discussion on more than one occasion over the next 4 or 5 years while Brett worked there. But I think he might have had one hiccup the first 6 or 8 months where he went over to somebody's house or they went somewhere and he had some alcohol and he realized that he had no business being on a scooter or driving or anything. And so he spent the night on the guy's couch, texted us to let us know, hey, I'm spending the night. And so when he got back, we had a little discussion about that it wasn't a lot because I could tell that he was more disappointed in himself for having that hiccup than he was than I could be, and that he was owning it and that he realized that he had to be a little more vigilant and not even be around alcohol or drugs for a period of time until he had built up the fortitude to say no and to be okay with being where alcohol was, but not having to have some of it. So that was really the only setback that I remember. So he lived with us, I'm going to say it was close to 2 years, but he had a job and he was making money. And so he got to the point where he was able to move out and get an apartment and got another vehicle, and he's done nothing but really good things ever since. And so I'm very proud of the man that he has become and is continuing to be, and the positive influence he's been for the recovery community. Started his podcast a little over 2 years ago. And so he's 115, give or take, episodes in on that. He's been on several other people's podcasts. He's a leader in his NA group, got married, has become a father, changed jobs a couple of times, and he's got a really nice job. He's got a career now, making good money, working hard. And so his mom and I couldn't be any prouder of the man he's become. I told my wife when he got arrested and he wasn't injured, he wasn't killed, he didn't kill anybody, he just did a lot of property damage. I said, you know what, if this is the bottom and this is where he has to hit and then he goes up from here, I said, it seems like a big deal right now, but 5 years from now, this will be a blip on the radar. And we're about 8 years past that, and it's just a small blip on the radar.
So Sergeant Morris, first of all, that's awesome. And, I our meetings are comprised, it's like a third. A third people in recovery, a third families and friends of people in recovery, and a third white collar, blue collar. People that work at schools, engineers, school principals, college professors. And the group that, one of the reasons I'm so glad you're here, Mr. Morris, is because a lot of times parents are thinking, what did I do wrong? Where did I go wrong? What do I got to do to help? And I didn't know your story until I just heard it, but you kind of did everything right. And I'm gonna let Brett chime in here soon, but you kind of did. And I don't know if that's because of your background in narcotics, but I will tell you this, at our meeting that we held at the Michigan Theater, Dr. Nora Volt, Dr. Fred Blow from the University of Michigan went around and asked everybody, if you were going to give advice to people in terms of helping someone in recovery, what advice would you give? And Denise Illich, who is a member of the Board of Regents at the University of Michigan, addiction has affected her family. And she said, don't ever, 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 ever give up on someone with an addiction. And as I was hearing you talk, you didn't ever, 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 ever give up on your son. And you did it in a way that you put up boundaries, which is what we hear from the professionals, right? And I'm certain that we're going to hear from Brett, I think, on how that kind of structure that you put in place to help him was a difference maker to him. And I thank you, sir, for sharing your story. And you go ahead, Mr. Morrison, and zoom out when you have to go. But if any, and we put, by the way, in the chat feature, if anybody wants to know how to sign up for Brett's podcast, Angela, that's what's there in the chat feature, right? I think that's what it is. And that's the recovery survey link to joining Brett. And Brett, thank you, Sergeant Morris, for that. Yes, that's what it is.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. So, Brett Morris, thank you for joining us. And by the way, Mr. Morris, in our flyer for this Zoom, there's a beautiful picture of your granddaughter being held by your son. And you got to look at that and think, boy, have we come a long way. Boy, has my son come a long way. And so you're a proud grandpa now. In addition to,
I didn't hear any of that. You got real granular and max headroom sounding.
Okay, so max headroom. All right. So I was just saying that there's a picture of Brett with your granddaughter on her Save the Date flyer. She's beautiful. And, in addition to being a proud papa, you're also a proud grandfather. Can you hear me, Brandon? Okay.
Yeah, I can hear you.
All right, awesome.
I think we lost him.
Okay, so
he's coming back.
Yeah, Sergeant Morris is back. But Brett, why don't you go ahead and take over? Because I'd love to have your dad. He's probably heard your story so much that I don't know if he wants to hear it again.
I don't know that he's heard it that many times.
Okay, so before he zooms out, why don't you go ahead and get started? I thank you for being here, especially knowing what you've been through the last week. And with that, Brett, why don't you take the next, we usually like to keep about 15 to 20 minutes for questions. So,
okay, yeah.
Over the next 15 to 20 minutes, go ahead and share your story.
Awesome. I guess I can start from the beginning. And I saw a question come in from David Gordon. And he said that it's he was referencing what my dad was sharing about, and he was saying that most people have more than one relapse, and I definitely had more than one relapse, and I think it was kind of funny that my dad said I only had the one. The first 2 years of my recovery journey after that arrest were kind of up and down. I felt like I had one foot in recovery and one foot not in recovery, and I was trying to figure things out. And I think that second job that he was alluding to, that was with his one of his friends that owned the company, like, I think that had a lot to do with me trying to figure things out. And there were some good influences at that place of employment, and there were some not so good influences. But you know to go back to what you had said about starting at kind of the beginning, my dad touched on it. And I was a homeschooled K through 12. And it's kind of a newer realization I think I've come to. But I think for me, I've struggled with some social anxieties, and I think that some of that may be attributed to my schooling and not being around as many people. But in the other hand, we were heavily involved in church, and I was in a lot of different church groups, and so I was around people. But I always kind of felt like an outcast, an alien kind of. I always felt like there was something different about me than other people. I never felt like I could be comfortable in those kind of social situations. And like he was alluding to, the first taste of wine at my aunt's house when I was 11 or 12. I can remember tasting that wine, and I didn't really like the flavor of the wine, but I remember that I liked the way that it made me feel. I liked, because I had never had it before, and I just kind of felt like this calm and just kind of mellow. And I really liked the way that it affected me. And so that was kind of that moment where it's like, I like this, and I'm gonna continue to pursue this path. I want to feel that feeling again. I want to see what happens if I drink more. I want to, and with my dad being in narcotics as well, I think part of it was a general curiosity about what drugs felt like, what it was like to be high, what different substances would do. And a lot of it was just me not being comfortable with myself, me not feeling okay with who I was, and just wanting to escape reality and just try to find that feeling again that I had when I was 11 or 12 with those little sips of wine. And it just, the progression of addiction is, it can be so rapid. Like he was alluding to, started out with drinking and smoking weed, and then moved out of the house, and then it was like the world just kind of opened up. My apartment was in not the best part of town. And oh, looks like my dad's heading out. Have a good night, sir.
Yes, sir.
um my apartment wasn't in a great part of town, and there were drug dealers that lived in my building and in the surrounding complex and stuff. And it was just really easy to get different substances. And that was when kind of that experimentation phase of my use began. And I just wanted to try anything I could get my hands on. I wanted to see what different substances felt like. And uh, I just had a real curiosity. I didn't have any fear surrounding drug use. I didn't think about the negative consequences. I didn't think about death. At that point in my life, in my early 20s, I was at this point of feeling invincible and just wanting to see what everything was about, and didn't realize the consequences, didn't realize that I could become addicted, didn't think long term. I didn't have any plans. I didn't, when I imagined the future, I didn't see myself living long enough to make plans, to have a family, to worry about a retirement, to worry about trying to get a good job. I didn't have any of those worries because I didn't plan on living beyond my 20s, if I'm being honest. And so that just kind of became my way of life. It was just, anytime I could get my hands on anything, I would take it. And a little further down the road, I found methamphetamine, and man, that was it. I remember the first time I took it, and just, it was like this is it. This is what I've been looking for. The search is over. I've found the solution. I found the cure. This is what I need. Like, my life is going to be so good, because that first time I got high on meth, it was just like this euphoria, and I felt like I had all of this energy and this focus, and I just felt like this is what has been missing in my life for the last 20 years, and I found it. It's right here in this little bag. And so I decided at that point, like, the rest of my life is going to be pursuing this drug, because it makes me feel so good. And I didn't know where that would lead, and I didn't know, where my life would go. And I can remember after I had moved into my dealer's house.
Oh boy.
So I had pretty much an unlimited supply, and I can remember I lived there for several months, and at one point he had cut me off because he said I was using too much, and I'd found a new guy, and I gotten to this point where even the other meth users in the house were telling me that I was using too much. And I had like this realization. It's kind of a weird story, and I guess I'll be candid and I'll share it. I had done some DMT with a buddy, and for those of you that aren't familiar with DMT, because it's kind of a more, I don't know, it's not like a mainstream common drug, but it's still kind of popular. But it's a hallucinogen, and it's a really short trip. And I had this trip where I was at my own funeral, and I saw, basically from like a third person, like, aerial view of my funeral, and it was my mom, my dad, and my sister, and nobody else showed up. None of my friends, nobody else showed up. And the pastor's up there giving like a really generic service, and my parents and my sister were talking throughout the whole service, and talking about like what a failure I was, and how my life had amounted to nothing, and just all this negativity and all these things about, I had so much potential and I wasted it. And I remember coming out of that trip, and that was kind of like like the first little awakening that I had, that my life was not going in the right direction. And that's when I decided that I didn't want to do the meth anymore. I decided that I couldn't do that anymore, because my life was just not going in the direction that I needed it to go, or the way that I thought it should go. And I remember I called my sister, and I broke down on the phone, and I told her what was going on. And she knew that I had been dabbling in drugs for years. But I told her that I had been on meth for a pretty consistent basis. I think it was probably about a year at that point. And I told her that I had to get out of that house. I couldn't live with my dealer anymore. Like, I'm done with it. I gotta get clean. But I didn't have any kind of recovery in my life. I didn't have any kind of connection to recovery meetings. I wasn't aware of anything like that. And I thought that the meth was my problem. And so I moved in with my sister, and I put down the meth, and then I picked up drinking again, and I did it very, very, very heavily. And it wasn't very long into being in this new environment and drinking, mixed with, like my dad was talking about, being a pizza delivery driver, driving for a living and drinking all the time, that the two just didn't mix. And it was pretty quickly into that I did have that DWI, and hit the cars in the house, and did all the property damage, and ended up going to jail, and kind of had a second kind of spiritual awakening in jail, realizing like, this is where my life is going, and I don't really want to continue on this path. I don't want to continue. Basically, I wanted to continue to get high, but I didn't want to continue to suffer the repercussions of my actions. Was kind of the point that I arrived to in recovery. And I kind of went into meetings with that idea of, maybe I can learn from these people how I can use successfully and not have all these negative consequences in my life. And that's just not how it works. And so I kind of had that back and forth, where I couldn't decide if I wanted to be in recovery or if I wanted to use. And I kind of went back and forth for a while. And I can remember, it was a little over a year or so into this recovery journey, and going to meetings, and being on probation, and getting my paper signed, and all that. I had made a pretty strong connection with this guy named Tim, and he pulled me aside after one of the meetings because. And for those of you that have been to like 12-step meetings and stuff, like after the meeting, everybody gets outside and they're chain smoking cigarettes and talking in the parking lot and, just kind of having a good time. And, he pulled me away from the group, and it was just he and I, and he looked me right in the eyes. And he said, if you continue to live your life the way you're living, with one foot in recovery and one foot out and going back and forth, and you'll use for a day and then you'll come back to recovery, and just this continue flip flop, he's like, you are going to die. And he was so serious and so sincere. And it was just like, that was the moment that I realized, like driving home, like thinking about that conversation, and then that thought of the funeral that I had seen in my head, all that kind of came together in this moment. And it was just like this overwhelming sense of like, I have to make a commitment. I'm either going to stop drugs completely, or I'm going to stop going to meetings, and I'm just going to do whatever I want to do, and I'm going to continue down this path of destruction. And that was 7.5 years ago, and I haven't had a drink, haven't had a drug, haven't done anything in that 7.5 years. And my life has flourished, and I've been blessed with a lot of things. My relationships with my family have been restored. I've been able to get a good job. I was able to get married. I have a daughter. All these blessings that have come from stopping the drugs and trying to learn to live a new way of life and begin to try to implement some of these things that I've been learning and being taught in these meetings.
Brett, do you have a picture of that beautiful daughter?
I
We don't
do.
need it.
It's actually the same one that's on. It's the same one that's on the flyer.
Put that up there.
So
There.
it's that was last Father's Day, so it's a little outdated. She's much larger now.
Awesome. Well, she's beautiful, and the was his name Tim, the guy
Yes.
that okay. So why did Tim choose to reach out to you? Like, is it just serendipitous, or did you know Tim? You must have known him through meetings, but
Yeah, he and I.
and not only did he reach out to you, but he did it in a way that was like, he didn't mince words.
Right,
And
right.
talk a little bit about Tim. And one thing I'm always curious about with people who make a decision to get into recovery, because it's not easy.
No.
Recovery is not easy. And it's hard work, and it takes commitment. Just like any other chronic, debilitating, acute, relapsing disease, right?
Mm-hmm.
So talk a little bit more about Tim, but what was it that just caused you to say, I'm done, I'm going to give this a go? And, oftentimes when I ask people, there are children, there's a friend who pulled them aside, like Tim did with you, or there's this seminal moment that's like, boom, I gotta do something, or I'm not going to make it, or my life isn't going to be what it could be. So talk about Tim, and talk about what it was that caused you to move in a direction toward recovery, and to now have this beautiful daughter. I'm assuming you've got an equally beautiful wife, and yeah, there's that beautiful smile. So look, talk about that, will you?
Yeah,
Please?
yeah, of course. I think a lot of just as far as Tim goes, he and I had gotten close in the meetings, and he had a similar story to mine, and he too had flip-flopped back and forth for a long time. He would come into the program, he would get a few months, he'd go back out, he'd come back, he'd get a few months, he'd go back out, and he had done that same pattern for years and years and years and years. And he had been around before I was there, and fortunately, the last time that he came back in, he's got a little bit more time than I do. I think he just celebrated 8 years, or 8.5, 9, I don't know. He's got a lot of time now. But I was there when he came back for the last time, and you know, he and I got really close. He was somebody I looked up to. He's a few years older than I am. And we just built this relationship. You know, he was always going out of his way to invite me to go to dinner with him after the meetings, hang out on the weekends, you know, just putting forth that extra effort to have me be a part of his life, and, you know, to really show me that there was something different this time, that he was living this way of life, and that he wanted to show other people, you know. And I think a lot of it was just that power of example, and knowing his past, and knowing that he had been in that same kind of mindset that I was in, of going back and forth, and, you know, one foot in, one foot out, and that relationship too, you know, just because at that point in time, you know, he was one of the people that I was closest with. And I think that because he said that, and just like the tone, and just the seriousness of his face, and, you know, like making direct eye contact, and, like, you know, being very, very serious with me, it had a lot of weight to it in that moment. And I knew that what he was saying was genuine. I knew that he wasn't just saying it. I knew that nobody put him up to it. I knew that it was what he was feeling and what he was thinking, and I knew that he was genuine about it. And, you know, just that combined, like it wasn't instantaneous, but those words stuck with me. And I you know, I drove home from the meeting that night, and I turned the radio off, and it was just like I was just soaking in what that conversation we had, or not really conversation. It was a pretty one-sided conversation. Just like those words were just going through my head, like, over and over and over again. I was just like mulling on those words, and it was kind of an emotional experience as well. Like feeling that love and that connection from somebody else, and feeling like he cares enough about me, even though I can't seem to do anything right, even though I keep, you know, I keep having these little slips and then coming back. Like he sees that I've tried to make an effort, and then I kind of give up on it, and just kind of this back and forth. And, you know, he took that time to say that, and he sees where I'm at, and he cares enough about me, and he wants me to be around long enough to, you know, to get this thing. And, you know, just mulling that over on the drive home, and like I said, having that flashback of that funeral that I had in my head. And, you know, just it was just kind of a combination of a lot of things. And I think him having that conversation with me also just kind of brought up things that I had heard in the meetings, because there were some meetings where I was on fire, and I wanted to read the book, and I wanted to, you know, I wanted to answer the questions and do all this stuff. And there were others where I'd sit in the back of the room with my arms folded, and, you know, just, you know, sign my paper so my probation officer will leave me alone. And, you know, a lot of that stuff that we hear in the rooms kind of came up. And it was just those seeds that had been planted over time. And for whatever reason, when he said that, like, that was the moment. I don't really know how else to answer
No,
that
no, no,
question.
that's good. So the short story is lots of gratitude toward Tim.
Yes.
Okay. Are you still close with him?
I
In,
don't see him. I don't see him as often as I used to. He goes to a different meeting than I do, but we still talk on occasion.
okay. So let's kind of segue into, so you're on your recovery path. Things are going well. When you talked with, when you and Tim had that one-sided conversation, you had not yet met your wife. Is that correct?
Correct. I had
Okay.
not met her. No.
Okay, so let's segue into, you're in recovery, things are going well. You've met the love of your life. Now you get this crazy idea that you want to do a podcast, and you don't, where does that come from? And how does it grow to these astronomical numbers? Take us to, it's 2 or 3 months before the world shuts down due to COVID.
Right.
So your timing couldn't have been better, because people in recovery are looking for, how do I stay connected into my community, be it
Right.
podcasts, Zooming, whatever. So your timing was good, but what does a guy like Brett Morris, how do you come up with I think I'm going to do a podcast.
Man, that's a great question, and I feel like I get asked that question all the time, and I don't have a really great answer for it. So my wife and I have been together for we were actually talking about it last night, and I think we decided 5 years. We dated for 2, and then we've been married for a little over 3. Um, and so the podcast has been around for just over 2 years now. Like you said, it came out right before the pandemic and the lockdown, and the world got flipped upside down. Um, and I don't really have a great answer for why I started the podcast. You know, the job that I was at before the one that I'm currently at, I worked by myself most of the time, and I would put in my headphones and I would listen to different podcasts. And I had found several that were motivational and recovery related podcasts that I really enjoyed. And then I had some other stuff that I would listen to, comedy and just kind of, sci-fi, whatever. I just kind of dabbled in all kinds of different podcasts, um, and I thought to myself, I think I could do that. I think that I could have some conversations with people and have some kind of impact, have a reach, and maybe be able to talk to some people that maybe haven't found recovery, or there's that stigma and they're afraid to go to meetings, they're afraid to ask for help, they're afraid to admit to anyone that they're struggling, fill in the blank. And so I bought a $20 microphone on Amazon and set it up in my closet with a laptop and started talking and recorded some really, really awful intros and segues and stuff, and kind of played around with it for a little bit. And it was absolutely tragic. I think my wife is the only person that has ever heard those clips, and it will probably stay that way. But then I found an online recovery community. I found a lot of different people on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook, and got plugged into some different online recovery groups and started having some conversations on there. And as I got to know some people, I asked them if they would be interested in being a guest on this podcast that I wanted to try. I didn't even have a name at the time, didn't really know a whole lot about podcasting. I had a little bit of recording experience when I was in high school, going to the church that we were at, helping out with audio and video over there. So I had a little bit of experience with some audio stuff. Not not an expert by any means, but enough that I felt like I could be dangerous and I could figure out how to do a podcast. But really, I think it was God that just kind of gave me this desire to start a podcast, and just the timing of it, just the way that it fell into place. Um, I got to stay home from work for a little while, and that gave me some extra time to find some guests and record some episodes and figure out how to edit. I didn't really know anything about editing, and just kind of put the whole thing together, and it felt like it was just supposed to be. It came out at the perfect time. And um, as far as like the numbers and stuff go, it still kind of blows me away at times. It really does. Like
How many people do you draw? It's once a week, your
right.
podcast?
Well, so I'm involved in two podcasts at the moment. So I have Recovery Survey, which is my original podcast, and I do one episode a week. And then there's another one that I do that's a live stream on Facebook and YouTube, and it's with me. And then there's a guy named Carl who hosts a different recovery podcast, and there's a lady named Ashley, and she is the NAMI Florida president. So the three of us get on here and have different guests come on, and we just kind of do a live show. It's a little bit different. We have some segments, and the beginning's kind of fun. We do kind of a morning show, kind of razz each other, and kind of joke around and have some fun, and then we get into some serious recovery topics.
And how many people does that draw? The one with people in different states?
That one has kind of fluctuated, but typically that one usually low numbers is usually about 3 to 4,000, and then we've had a few episodes that have been in the 20,000 range.
So that's awesome. And your podcast with just Brett Morris draws how many? I thought you told me a number, 1,000.
Yeah, right now I'm hitting about 1,200 is about my average per episode.
Yeah. So, one of the reasons, Brett, I wanted to talk with you and why I found your story so interesting, in addition to your dad as a retired Texas state trooper, but that people in recovery need to know that this is all possible
Yeah.
and not to give up and to stick with it, which is what I admire so much about you and your father and how you took it to this next level and wanting to give back and figuring out how to cobble a podcast together when you had some high school experience, but it certainly wasn't a precursor to what you're doing now. You had to figure it out. And I and I say this often, but I want to say it again, that the more arrows in someone's recovery quiver, the better, right? Because you might not be into yoga, Brett. Maybe it's exercise for you. Maybe it's you need a free bus pass. Maybe it's just tuning into a meeting like your podcast where you can learn from other people. There is no one size fits all for recovery. Just like there is really no one size fits all for people with different types of cancer or diabetes, so I'll say it again. If you are in recovery and you can use Brett's podcast as another arrow in your recovery quiver, you're better off for it, right?
Absolutely. And one of the beautiful things that I found just through doing the podcast and getting to have conversations with so many people. I mean, I've had I'm a little over 100 episodes in at this point. There's just so many different viable ways to recover. There's so many different avenues. If you go to a 12-step meeting and it just doesn't fit, that doesn't mean that you can't recover. There's so many different things. There's smart recovery, there's recovery dharma, there's all these different avenues that you can take to recover, and you just have to find that community, find that place where you belong. I've had conversations with people that don't even go to meetings, but they're involved in a recovery yoga class, and that's their meeting, is they go to that yoga class and they do a little meditation, and then they talk with the people after they do their yoga, and that's their form of a meeting. So there's just so many different options. And I think that if we have this limited view of this is what recovery is and this is the only way to recover, then we're not going to be able to reach the people that really need to hear that message. And there's just so many different ways that we can go about it. And like you said, having that quiver full of arrows, there's so many different things that we can do to add to our recovery, and even podcasts and YouTube and that kind of stuff. It doesn't even necessarily have to be a recovery a recovery program. There's plenty of things that are self-help or motivational or encouraging that can help us in those different in our recovery journey. And I think for me as well, just the podcasting thing, like finding a hobby was pretty important as well. Like finding something that was creative that I could focus on in my free time, that I could do, that I knew was something that was positive, and that was a good one for me. I tried my hand at a lot of different hobbies, before I found podcasting.
I'll tell you, Brett, I was going to save this till the end of the meeting, but our next meeting in June is on the importance of different sorts of things that you can do while you're in recovery. We're going to call it just expression, that we're going to define as art, music. Maybe we'll even throw in podcasting, community, that you got to try all these things, but they're all very important. And we're going to showcase two guys, David Awadala, who's on our advisory board, and Bryce Cobb, who is a part of the Phoenix Gym. Those are the people that go nationwide and help start gyms for people in recovery. They're going to share their story and friendship and how through music they met and cranked out this amazing tune that we're going to premiere at our meeting,
Oh,
for
very
lack of a
cool.
better term. Yeah.
Very cool.
But it is. And I wanted to read this question. In your father's description of your arc of recovery, one of the things was that of discipline and a sense of kind of old school values of accountability, owning the consequences of your actions without a sense of being coddled, rescued, sheltered from these realities. Do you believe that this was an important ingredient leading to your, leading to your success?
Mm, that's a great question. I pulled that up a second ago when I saw the little bubble pop up. I would say yes, definitely it was. In hindsight, living it in the moment, having to deal with these repercussions, having to deal with that kind of strict old school discipline, I did not like it. I had become accustomed to doing whatever I wanted, whenever I wanted. Just kind of. I guess the best way that I could describe the way I was living was just pleasure seeking. Whatever I could find that gave me pleasure is what I would do, and that was the most important thing to me at that time. And coming back home to that old school style of discipline was not pleasant. I didn't enjoy it, but in hindsight, I definitely think that that helped contribute to my success. I think that that helped me. Really, I think having to deal with the consequences was a huge piece of my recovery, because I can remember, like my dad was talking about, having to get a job almost immediately when I got back to his house. I found my pin. I worked at Waffle House for a little while. I found my Waffle House 2012 pin. So his timeline was a little off. I think he said 2014, so it was 2012. But that's neither here nor there. But and I found that in a box because my wife and I just moved a few months ago, and I kept it on my desk because it's a reminder of where I've been and where I'm going. And this was pretty much one of the lowest points of my life, was riding my bike in the summer to Waffle House. That was not a highlight of my life, but I think because of those old school values and of him not trying to coddle me, I think that really did help me feel those consequences. It helped me understand that for every action there's a reaction, and just having to come back to reality, because I lived in that fantasy world of escaping my reality and hiding from pain and hiding from my feelings and emotions. And had to get a job and had to start making payments. There was a pretty hefty financial burden from that DWI and paying for that property damage. And I had to go to a bunch of ooh, second puberty. I had to go to a bunch of different classes, and those cost money. I had to go to Mothers Against Drunk Driving and all these different classes as part
So
of my
you had to
probation.
pony up for the damage to those cars in that house?
Insurance covered some of it. They covered the majority of it, but there was still all, I think total. I think I had to pay about $12,000 for all the property damage and the DWI and the classes and all that. And when I when I got arrested, I think I had like $20 in my pocket, and that was the extent of the money that I had. So I was broke, and I had to take responsibility and had to pay those fees. And you know like you was saying, that old school, not coddling or being rescued or being sheltered. But I am grateful. I'm grateful that my parents allowed me to move back into their house, even though at the
Yeah.
time it was the last place they
You know
wanted to
what
be.
again, what your dad did, and I think it's important for not only parents, but friends of people in recovery. He didn't give up on you.
Mm,
I think, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, Brett, but you knew on some level that your dad loved you and that he put those boundaries up for that reason.
mm, yeah.
And um, it ended up working out. It ended up working out. And I just there I want to share with you a text message that came to me, and it's kind of crazy. And I don't know if this happens to you on your podcast, but I get stuff emailed to me during these Zoom meetings. I get stuff text to me. Hey, ask him this, ask him that. You got a piece of hair sticking up on your head. I mean, I get all kinds of stuff, but somebody sent me this who's in recovery. A key word, Mario, is community.
Yes.
That find your group. Successful recovery does not happen alone. And you did that. You found that, you sought that out. And that's just not for people in recovery. That's also for families and friends of people in recovery, And does anybody have any questions for Brett before we I'll check on the no, we've got, by the way, just so you know, Brett, that was a physician who asked that question, about boundaries. And I'm happy to report that physician is present at virtually all of our meetings. Dr. David Gordon, he's an awesome guy. And
my sister's watching.
Your sister is watching?
My sister's watching. My wife's watching. I just saw this tab with the attendees.
Yeah, it's all good. And I don't know if, did your wife want to just, Brandon, I don't want to put her on the spot or anything, but you think she'd show her face?
I'm not sure if she would or not.
Okay, well, if she doesn't want to, if she wants to, I'll put her in. I wouldn't mind meeting her, even if it's via Zoom. But what's your wife's name?
Chrissy.
Chrissy, if you don't want to show up here, I bet, and you can put in the chat feature, Chrissy, I bet you're proud a million times over of your husband here, aren't you? And, if you don't want to come in and add anything, you can put it in the chat feature. But I wanted to, we don't have any more questions. We typically go, Brett, about an hour and 20 minutes, an hour and a half, and we're up against this now. But I wanted to thank your amazing father, as well as your mom, even though she's not here. Yes, I'm unbelievably proud of him. So that's awesome. All of you, and with your permission, Brett, I want to plug your podcast on our website and in my email blast that goes out to a couple thousand people. I'm going to send that out. Because of the time lag with connecting over things, I didn't put the social media dollars behind this. And, that was due to the unfortunate passing of your grandpa. But I am going to do my best to push your podcast out to as many people as possible, because I know you've got an amazing thing going here that I am 100% certain would be of value to people, not only in my community, but across, communities across the country. So I thank you for that. Before we end our meeting, Angela, if you could put our survey in the chat feature. And by the way, why recovery survey? What's up with that, Morris? Where'd you get that name?
That's a good question. So I had a slightly different concept for the podcast when I first started it, and it didn't quite pan out the way that I wanted it to. But my original concept was I was going to have one topic, and then I was going to survey a big group of people and get everybody's answers to that one question and put it all together into one episode. And one of the things that I found out very quickly is that people in recovery can be a little bit self-centered and they don't like to share. And a lot of people just wanted to do their own solo episodes. So if you scroll way back, I think like episode 3 or 4 is one of those group episodes, but I think that was the only one that I actually did. And that's kind of where the name came from.
That works for me. I will tell you, you must be aware your rating is, I think, the best you can get. it's on Apple, I think.
Mhm.
And I think you've got 5 stars, 5 out of 5. And you've got, I don't know, what did your dad say, over 100? What is it, podcast now going? And I tuned into that. I don't know if it was the 2-year episode or where you were celebrating
Oh, that
doing
was
it.
episode 100. Yeah.
Episode 100. I actually listened to it, and it was people chiming in, congratulating you. I heard a recording from your wife, which, like I said, I could go on and on. That is our survey, you guys, but I wanted to, and there's a link to all of our programs. Brett, I would love to send you a copy of this. Make sure that you, oh, I did share a copy. What did you think about it, by the
It
way?
was fantastic. I wish that when I had read through this, I had highlighted it, because it's been a little while since I've read it, and I wish I had highlighted it so that I could like bring pieces out and talk about them.
No, it's okay.
But yes, you did send me a copy
Okay.
several months ago.
Okay. One of the things that I think the reason it reads the way that it does is it doesn't read like something in a research article.
Mm.
It's replete with quotes from people in recovery who say, this is how stigma made me feel. And I know of nothing that's more convincing about changing someone's view about people battling the disease of addiction than to hear from them their own words on how it made them feel to be referred to as whatever those words that you hear often, and how it made them take a step backward in their recovery. And so that's why we publish this, so that we can educate everyone on there's a better way. And it starts with choosing our words more carefully when we're talking about the disease of addiction. So with that, my friend, you're awesome. I don't know if your dad's still here. It doesn't really matter. He's incredible too. I can't thank you both enough for sharing your stories, because that's how we learn, right? That's one of the main reasons you do your podcast, is so that you can hopefully make a difference in someone's life who is right where you were 7 or 8 years ago, or however long it's been, Brett. And I thank you for that. So with that, everyone, thank you, sir. Again, Brett.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Yep. If I can help you in any way, please reach out to me. I'm all about that. And I thank you from the bottom of my heart. And everyone for zooming in. Thank you. Appreciate everyone who took the time to zoom in. Take care, Brett.
Thanks, you too.
Yes, sir. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Brandon.